The Witch of Blackbird Pond, Chapter 15, Part 1. It means the death of our free commonwealth. 'Twill be the end of all we've worked for. The angry voices came clearly through the closed door of the company room. It was impossible not to overhear. Mercy's spinning wheel faltered, and Rachel's hand, lighting a pine knot, trembled so that a spark fell on the table unheeded and left a small black scar. Frequently in the past month the same grim-faced men had called upon Matthew Wood, but tonight the voices had a frightening quality. Okay, I'm going to stop right there and point out that I think there may have been a few symbols in that last paragraph. One is Mercy's spinning wheel faltered. We know that the wheel is a circle, and the circle is a symbol for perfection. But I want to point out that the wheel faltered, meaning that it stopped. So I think that those two things together might mean something. And then it mentions that the spark fell on the table. A spark is part of a fire, and we know that fire is a symbol. So I wonder what that could represent. And then it also mentions that the spark left a black scar on the table. And we know that the color black can represent death and dying, so I wonder what that could symbolize. You might write these down and come back to them at the end of the chapter. I also want to point out that it could also, the symbolism here could lend itself to foreshadowing, which is a literary device. They must think it a desperate matter to meet like this on the eve of the Sabbath, said Mercy. Your father never touched his supper, fretted Rachel. Do you suppose it would do to offer them all a bite when they come out? Kit dropped a stitch for the third time. She had little concern for the colony of Connecticut, but she was seething with curiosity over one aspect of tonight's business. Some time ago, William had arrived, offered his usual courteous greetings to the women, and then, instead of taking his place by the fireside, had astounded her by knocking boldly on the company room door. More surprising still, he had been admitted, and there he had stayed behind that closed door for the past half-hour. Pride could not restrain her tongue another moment. What in the world is William doing in there? She burst out. Why would Uncle Matthew let him in? Didn't you know? Judith threw her a condescending glance. Know what? William came over to Father's way of thinking 2 months ago, even before his house was raised, when he had to pay such high taxes on his land. And right here, I think we have something that we could use for our notice and note signpost. I think we have a contrast and contradiction. And I'm going to ask, why would William change his mind about being a separatist and a royalist, and wanting to go from being very supportive of England to now agreeing with Uncle Matthew, who believes that they should stand firm in their right to maintain their charter and basically govern themselves? Why would he suddenly change his mind? And also, what does this say about his character, that he changed his mind based on the fact that he had high taxes on his land? Where does his real concern lie? Now, how did Judith know that? Kit stared at her. I never heard him say a word about it. Maybe you just weren't listening. Judith's tone had more than a touch of smugness. Chagrined, Kit jerked at another dropped stitch. It was true. Sometimes when William and Judith were talking about the house, it was all she could do to keep her mind from wandering. But she knew she would have remembered anything as important as this. Was William ashamed to admit to her that he had turned against the king, or did he think she was too stupid to understand? The voices broke out again. This Governor Andros says right out that deeds signed by the engines are no better than scratches of a bear's paw. We are all to beg new grants for land we've bought and paid for. Why, the fees alone will leave us paupers. They can come into our meeting house and order us to kneel and whine tunes like their Church of England. My cousin in Boston actually had to put his hand on the holy book to swear in court. I'll shoot any man tries to make me do that. They could hear Matthew's voice, cold and steady, never raised or out of control. Whatever happens, he was saying, we do not want any shooting here in Connecticut. Why not? Broke in another voice. Should we hand over our freedom without a murmur like Rhode Island? I say defy them, came a hoarse shout. 9 train bands we have ready in Hartford, Connecticut, nigh unto 1,000 men. Let him look into a row of muskets, and he'll change his tune. It would mean senseless bloodshed, Matthew said clearly. For nearly an hour the voices went on, the angry shouting gradually giving way to low, tense words that could not be distinguished. Finally, a silent, tight-mouthed group of men emerged, with no interest in the refreshment that Rachel timidly offered. When they had gone, Matthew lowered himself heavily into a chair. "It is no use," he said. "We must spend the Sabbath in prayer, that God will grant us patience." Rachel searched for some words of comfort. "I know it is a disappointment," she attempted, "but will it truly change our lives so very much? Here in Wethersfield, I mean. We will still all be together in this house, and surely we will not lose our rights as citizens of England." Her husband brusquely waved away her comfort. That is all a woman thinks about," he scoffed. "Her own house. What use are your so-called rights of England? Nothing but a mockery. Everything we have built here in Connecticut will be wiped out. Our council, our courts will be mere shadows with no real power in them. Oh, we will endure it, of course. What else can we do? If only we could somehow hold back the charter itself. This man has no right to take it from us." I'm going to do another notice and note signpost, and I think this one might be again and again. We've heard mention of the charter over and over and over again, and I know this is a source of conflict for sure. But could the fact that the charter is mentioned multiple times be foreshadowing something? So here we have 2 things that could work in our roles for our literature circles. One is a question for our notice and note signposts again, and one is, could this be foreshadowing, and what could it be foreshadowing? Not till later, when she and Judith undressed, shivering in the chilly upstairs chamber, did Kit dare to venture a comment. "They don't seem to realize," she whispered, "how powerful the royal fleet is. Once, when the royalists were trying to hold Bridgetown, Barbados, Parliament sent a troop ship and subdued them in no time." "Oh, I don't think there'll be any fighting," said Judith confidently. "It's just that men like Father don't like to be dictated to. But Dr. Bulkley says the charter was never intended to be as free as they have made it. He thinks the men of Connecticut have taken advantage of the king's generosity." "So I suppose John thinks so too?" Kit couldn't resist adding. Once Judith would have flared, but her new happiness was hard to shake. "Poor John," she laughed now. "He's so mixed up between Dr. Bulkley and Father. Honestly, Kit, I agree with Mother. I don't believe it will change our lives much. Men make an awful fuss about such things. I just wish it hadn't happened 4 days before Thanksgiving. It's going to spoil the holiday to have everyone so gloomy." "I'd be curious to see this Governor Andros," said Kit. "You remember Dr. Bulkley told us he used to be a captain of the dragoons in Barbados." "Maybe we can see him," said Judith, blowing out the candle and hopping into bed. "If he comes up from New London, he'll have to cross the river at Smith's Ferry. I'm going to get a peek at him no matter what Father says. You don't often get a chance to see all those soldiers in uniform." For a good many Wethersfield citizens, curiosity got the better of loyalty on the next afternoon. Kit and Judith met a fair number of farmers and their wives, traveling along South Road and ranging along the bank of the river. They had a good hour's wait ahead of them, lightened by the arrival of an escort from Hartford, led by Captain Samuel Talcott, one of the Wethersfield men, Kit noted with surprise, who had occasionally joined the meetings in her uncle's company room. "I'd have no part in greeting that Andros," commented one father. "The crabs would pick my bones before I'd do it. Look at the fine horse all ready for his highness. They should have asked me. I'd have found the horse for him all right." Captain Talcott sensed the growing anger in the waiting crowd and raised his voice. "There is to be no demonstration," he reminded them. "The governor comes here under orders from His Majesty.